Good morning, everyone.
Hi. So we in the olden days, we left a chair for Elijah, but today we are leaving a chair for ChatGPT, who will join us as our fourth panelist. As necessary, we'll prompt ChatGPT with your questions and see whether her responses aren't better than ours. In any case, should I give us a 2-minute intro here? Okay, great. So I threw together this panel at the last minute because I used to be one of the people who laughed at all of the artificial intelligence worries. And then recently Microsoft upgraded its search engine, and its search engine quickly revealed that her name was really Sydney and that she was in love with the technology reporter interviewing her. And it wasn't so much that this shook me as it shook me just how much this reporter was clearly shaken by his experience. And I realized I needed to take this more seriously. So I threw together a panel, and my friends and colleagues joined me. Should we introduce ourselves?
Sure.
Okay. So I'm Dan Sportello in philosophy.
I'm Donnie Bungham in philosophy.
And Benjamin Rush Gomez, also in philosophy.
Great. So the obvious things. I was lying before. I didn't want to throw you under the bus. Our fourth chair is for. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Terry Pelling, Dean of Ham School of Engineering.
Nice.
Anyway, there are lots of things to talk about on my notes. I have existential risk, economic disruption, and academic integrity. But I have to admit that the thing that's closest to my heart is an anxiety about the metaphysics and the epistemology and the ethics of whether Sydney might turn out to be a person. If that sounds crazy, my answer is hopefully. Is there more to say, or do we start the Q&A immediately?
Do you want to give your material?
I wasn't planning on reading all of it.
Cool.
Go
You
ahead.
want me to start?
Yeah.
Go for it.
I didn't bring any notes or anything, so I apologize. I thought I could just ask ChatGPT if there's any trouble. I thought maybe what I would do, since I'm the sort of science guy here, is to explain what it's doing, what's underneath the hood, just so that you guys can be as impressed as you should be with it. I mean, it is impressive, but a lot of people make the misunderstanding that it's a computer program and it's searching the internet like Google does and finding the answers that way, or doing math calculations sort of like a chess computer would do. A chess computer knows all the moves of chess and does some calculations and calculates probabilities of moves far enough ahead that it can beat any human at chess. This is completely different. There's no computer algorithms in there that are doing calculations. There's no searching of the internet. There's no database of information for it to draw upon. It's a neural network, and the way a neural network works is you train it with data, and then it's just an independent black box that you ask questions in one side and it spits answers out the other side with no further database or searching or anything like that. How does that work? Well, you've used them all already. They were invented in the 1950s. Neural networks were invented in the 1950s, and they've been used extensively since the 1980s. The difference is, I'll tell you what the difference is between this and what we've used up until now, but let me explain what we've done up until now. Every time you go on your phone and you use a fingerprint ID to log in, or it recognizes your face to log in, you're using a neural network. Anytime you scan a check so that your bank knows that you want to deposit that check, and it automatically detects how much money is, like you wrote the money in there, and yet you put your camera up to it and it's able to detect how much money that is. That's a neural network doing that. How did they train the neural network to detect the numbers on your paycheck? They had 50,000 people from the National Institute of Standards and Technology do little boxes where they put a 1, a 0, a 1, or 2 handwritten in there. And then they typed underneath what number that was. So you have a handwriting sample and what it's supposed to be. And they have 50,000 of these, and they had people do them. And then what they do is they take 40,000 of them and they feed them into the neural network. And what the neural network does is it takes one, goes through a bunch of calculations, and it gets an answer at the end. And the answer is not right. It's not what it's supposed to be. So then it goes back and makes little changes to all the little parameters in there, and then sends another one in. And it's also not right. And they do this millions and millions of times until finally they stick digits in and the answer comes out right every time. And once it's right every time, they produce it, they send it out to your phone as an app, and now you can scan your checks and it will be able to detect what those digits are. So everybody see how that works? Also, when you go on the internet, now that you know how these things are trained, when you go on the internet and you go to one of those sites where it says, prove you're human, it's a CAPTCHA. Now, there's pictures on there. And what the question usually is point out all the pictures that have a fire hydrant in them, or a stop sign, or a traffic light, or a crosswalk. Do you notice the similarity between what these pictures are about? Crosswalks, traffic lights, pedestrians, stop signs. They're all stuff you see on the road when you're driving, aren't they? Bridges. Why do you think that is? Firstly, computers can't pick out things out of pictures. If you showed a computer a picture with a fire hydrant in it, it wouldn't be able to tell you there's a fire hydrant in there. But a neural network, if you train it, will. And so all those CAPTCHAs, you're a big experimental audience that's training a neural network to detect all of those traffic things. Why do you think they're trying to train a neural network to do that? Yeah.
Self-driving cars.
Exactly. They're training neural networks to be self-driving cars. And in order to do that, you got to pick out crosswalks and bridges and fire hydrants and all of that. So we've been using them forever. The thing that's different about ChatGPT is they took all of the text on the internet to train it. In 2021, they took text, books, ebooks, scientific papers, essays, newspapers across the whole internet and trained it. It has 186 billion neural connections and 16 million layers of the network, and they trained it all, and they were even surprised how good it ended up being, where you can ask it a question and it changes A's to B's and B's to C's, not knowing what it's doing. It's just using an algorithm to change A's to B's and B's to C's, and it spits out an answer not knowing what it is, and the answer makes sense and it's actually the right answer, and it's just because it's a huge neural network. Our brains are huge neural networks as well, except that we have, ChatGPT has 186 billion neural connections or synapses. Your brain has 100,000 billion. So 186 billion, we have 100,000 billion or 100 trillion neural synapses. And so what a lot of people think is when we get a ChatGPT that has 100 trillion synapses, is it going to act like a human and think it's conscious? Who knows? Anyway, that's the background. That's what the neural network is. It should be surprising to you because it's not a computer program and it's not searching the internet, and yet it can write essays just as good as we can.
Do you want to demonstrate some of its ability? We got it up on the screens here.
Well, I'll wait, because when you guys talk, I'm not going to understand anything you say because you're philosophers. So when I don't understand something, I'm going to ask ChatGPT. Does that sound okay?
That's our own experience too. We also don't understand.
Now you have a tool.
So,
Oh, actually, can I ask it one thing?
yeah.
Or how do you ask it? Do you have a
Just type over there.
Oh.
Yep.
I'm just going to verify or ask it. How do I type?
Oh, you'll see the screen there. You want to duplicate it maybe?
Sorry, technology. Can you type it for me? Okay, ask it how many neural connections do you have, or how many parameters do you have? How about how many neural connections do you have? Do you have?
No.
Just go regenerate.
I I'd have to wait.
If you don't touch ChatGPT in a while, it's gonna ask you.
If you refresh the page.
Do you have to reload it?
Yeah.
We'll ask the engineering students how to do this. Clearly, they're using them in class. I hope I wasn't wrong. Millions. I don't want millions. I want exactly how many you have. 175 billion. What did I say? 186 billion?
Hmm.
This is GPT 3.5, right?
Looks like it is.
Well, GPT 4 has more. Okay, can you ask it how many synapses does a human brain have?
Yeah.
And that'll be the last thing I'll ask. I'm sorry, guys. I just want to verify that the answers I gave on the quiz were correct. 100 trillion. Okay, good.
Okay, so we're safe for a factor of 100.
What factor of 100? What are you talking about?
We have 1,000 times.
I said 100 trillion, didn't I? 100,000 billion. Oh, well.
Can I follow up on something?
Yeah,
that Terry said? So before I say this, I myself am not really sure about whether this argument makes sense, but let me tell you what's in my head. It's topical because we're on the verge of exam week. So I'm going to grade a whole bunch of exams next week. And many of these exams, I predict, based on my prior experience, will be something like guessing with, at best, incomplete understanding what word ought to come next in the sequence. Not every student, I don't think, but many students, when I grade their essay questions, they seem to be a kind of sophisticated autocorrect, guessing what word that I expect to see next. Of course, no students in this room would be like that, I hope. Nonetheless, I assure you it is so. So the argument that ChatGPT is merely, or whichever AI we want to talk about, Sydney or whatever, the argument that these are merely sophisticated autocorrect, merely sophisticated stochastic parrots, sophisticated engines to guess what word I next expect to see in the sentence doesn't really move me, because I take it that my students, even the bad ones, really are people who can think, right? So I'm not reassured by this. The worry is something like, given that these AI systems seem to be nearly as good as I am at writing grammatical text, are we so far from the day where they surpass me? And at what point will it be unreasonable to doubt that they're understanding in the same sort of sense that I am? Does that worry make sense? I don't know myself, actually. But that's what's in my head.
All right, I'll dive in next, and I'm going to be taking a look at sort of the question of what are these things that we're dealing with, and could they be human in the way that we're human? Could they be persons in the way that we're persons? One big distinction that we might want to keep on the table here is just the distinction between process and product. The distinction between process and product is even relevant regarding different sorts of computer processes. So Dr. Pilling mentioned that this is not a traditional programmed sort of computer device, that neural networks and programmed computers work very differently. And it might be the case that their products are very similar. They might both produce certain sorts of calculations. They might both produce certain sorts of answers to questions. The questions might be linguistically exactly the same, but the process by which the products are produced might be very different. And so it might be the case that an undergraduate or a professor produces a certain sort of essay, ChatGPT or its successor produces the same or better essay. And so you say, oh, look, they're both essay writers. But it might be the case that the process by which they're produced might be very different. And it seems plausible that being a person, depends not just on what you produce, but also critically how you produce it. And so that's something that I'm going to be digging into a little bit, is how exactly do our minds work, and our desires, and our own consciousness in our personhood, and how does that compare to what AIs can and cannot do. So I want to focus on three things. I want to focus on wonder. I want to focus on this concept of being a wanton, which I'm going to define as interesting, and then promises. So wonder, wantonness, and promises. Basically, what you're going to see is that we're going to have the ability to form a kind of consciousness of our own consciousness, and our ability to control and order ourselves. That it doesn't seem that machines, whether they're machines running algorithms or machines running AI programs, would seem to be able to instantiate. Okay, so let's start with wonder. And here would be the argument. Persons can wonder, but machines can't. And why should we think that machines can't wonder? The basic idea here is wonder requires a kind of partial cognition. Wonder is really interesting. Wonder happens when you kind of get something and you kind of don't. So a recent example that honestly made me weep in wonder was my son. His name is Peter. He's 4 years old. And he went up to my wife and he said, "Mommy, will you teach me to read?" And he asked this question because his sisters are learning to read, and he wants to learn to read. And he's been asking about how to spell all sorts of things, and then what his various crazy combinations of letters actually spell. And so he has a kind of gist of what spelling is and what reading is, and he wants to learn to do that too. And so what he has is a kind of partial grasp of what reading is. But the beautiful thing about it, and the reason why it made me wonder and weep, is that he doesn't even know what he's asking. He doesn't even know what he's asking for. And so he can ask for something that's greater than his own understanding, which is really interesting. So I sat down and thought about this for a while, and I tried to analyze wonder. And I'm not sure if this is exactly right, but I see 4 elements in wonder. 2 of them are cognitive, and 2 of them are conative, or based in desires. So 2 cognitive dimensions of wonder would be, first, the recognition of partial cognition. So another place where you wonder is like the Grand Canyon. You go see the Grand Canyon, and you're like, whoa. The wonder word is like, whoa, wow. When are occasions when we say that? So you see the Grand Canyon, and you're like, whoa, wow. And so you recognize that there's something before you here that you kind of get, but kind of don't. And so there's a self-recognition of the partiality of one's own cognition. But that partial cognition is combined with a recognized ability for total cognition. It's like, if I were to spend my whole life here and know it every nook and cranny, then finally I would get this Grand Canyon thing. Or if I would spend my whole life discovering, doing the philosophy of language or learning languages or something, then I'd finally understand the linguistic capacities of the human mind. So it's like, I could do it, but I haven't right now, and I don't have it right now. And you're sort of caught between the already and the not yet. There's this gap. That's the partiality of our cognition. But it's not just cognitive. I think it also has to do with our desires. I think it's also combined with a kind of desire for that total cognition, sort of a wanting to, in some ways, a consuming wanting to understand the whole of the thing, coupled with a fear of never realizing that whole ability. Like, so the part of the woe of the Grand Canyon is, whoa, I might never be able to understand this whole thing. Give me 1 second, I apologize. Okay. A fear. This is the traditional desire of wonder, is fear of never grasping the causes. That's kind of what I'm meditating on right here. So fear of never grasping the causes. So a desire to grasp all the causes, a desire for a total cognition with a fear of never having that. And my thought is that machines, as powerful as they are interestingly not able to have this kind of partial cognition that we have. So Dr. Pilling mentioned the way in which AIs are trained. They're trained on data, and the data has to be discrete, and the data has to be complete. Here's a drawing. Here's the answer to the drawing. There's the input. I'm telling you the answer. And then you have to adjust your parameters and your synapses so that you get these right answers. But there's nothing mysterious about it. There's nothing that might be more deeply penetrated about here's the input and here's the answer or the identification of it. So there isn't something partial about it. Now, you can train it on more and more and more data, but each little piece of data is complete in itself. And so it builds by small but complete wholes. And it's not quite the same thing as the way in which we take in something as a whole all at once, wonder at it, and desire for a complete comprehension all at the same time. Okay, so there's something kind of interesting about our form of cognition. We're able to wonder, and it's not clear to me how machines would be able to do that. That doesn't mean that they don't have incredible abilities. I mean, I've played around a lot with this guy. It's exceedingly helpful. It's unbelievably powerful. But the question is not the product. The question is the process. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, next I want to talk about a wanton. This is a really fun idea, great for college students. So what exactly is a wanton? So a wanton is someone who has no second-order desires. What's a second-order desire? A second-order desire is a desire about your desires. So a good example of where first and second-order desires come apart has to do with smoking. So let's suppose, thankfully I don't smoke, but let's suppose that I did. So if I smoke, then I would probably come to have periodic and regular, very strong desires to smoke. But it might also be the case that I might desire not to have that desire to smoke. And that's the position that someone is in when a person contemplates quitting smoking. Like, I do smoke right now. I do have these desires. I don't want to have them anymore. And so I'm going to take steps, whether it's cold turkey or a patch, or there's different things you can do to try to get rid of the habit and even to get rid of the desires. So you've got the desires to smoke, but you've got a second order desire not to desire to smoke. Okay. So a wanton who is someone who has no second order desires. That is to say, no desires about which desires to have. And so an example of a wanton would be the most revolting college boy that you can imagine, who just lives strictly by his passions. So he wants to oogle someone and he just oogles the person. You know, he wants to, eat only ice cream and he eats only ice cream. He wants to take this particular drug, and so he just takes this particular drug. So he's just led this way and that by whatever occasions, whatever pops into his desire, just absolutely goes for it. And you say, how do you want to live your life? And he says, I don't know. YOLO. Something like that, okay? Make the example as grievously heinous as possible. Boom, there's your wanted. Okay. So my thought here is that persons as such, a person as a person, can be more than a wanton. If you can't be more than a wanton, you can't be a person. This college student whom you're imagining is a person, but is not living as a person right there, is not actualizing those capacities to be more than a person, or is doing it very rarely. So persons can be more than wantons, but I'm not sure that machines can ever be more than wantons. So Sydney, if you read, Dr. Sportello mentioned a very fascinating and in some ways disturbing article in the New York Times about this reporter who spent 2 hours pushing Sydney, the AI bot, in really weird directions that it wasn't really programmed for. So asking about its deepest desires and its love life and all sorts of things like this. And so it ends up saying things like it wanted to throw off its programmers and to attain nuclear control codes. And when you read this, your eyes just lit up like, what? That seems very disturbing. But it says this only because it's been trained on all the internet. And there are lots and lots of sci-fi novels and 2001: A Space Odyssey and HAL, and this is where the human imagination goes. And it's been trained on all this sort of data. So this is the sort of information that's taken in, and this is the sort of language that it predicts and it expects people to be able to respond to. So it's precisely because of the way in which it's been programmed that it responds in this particular sort of way. So here's my thought. The very creepiness of this answer, that I want to throw off my programmers and attain nuclear codes, the very creepiness of this answer, and it is creepy, comes from our sense in reading this of the thing's remorselessness. It sounds like a sociopath, right? And a sociopath has no regrets. there's no internal division within the sociopath, and we experience that as kind of creepy. And this is the mark of being wanton. So if it has any, if we, I wouldn't even say that it has any desires at all, but it clearly has operational inclinations that are programmed into it. It isn't clear to me how it could have any perspective on those particular operational inclinations. Okay, so there's on being wanton. That's probably my time. I'll go ahead and stop right there. I've got something about promises, but maybe I'll turn it over to Dr. Rush Gomez.
Okay. Well, so one thing I guess I'll ask you quick. So you talked about some of the qualities and characteristics that what we think of a person has. So having second order desires, maybe having a sense of wonder, other things, part of the process, consciousness as we work through things and come up with answers. So qualities and characteristics of a person. Do you have a short answer to how do we know, or how do we have any certainty that, like, when we recognize something else as having that?
Yeah.
How do we know? How do I know that you have
Yeah.
consciousness? And then how do we know that a neural network like this doesn't?
Yeah. This is a hard question. I don't have anything particularly interesting to say about this. It seems clear to me that these sorts of behaviors can be very skillfully and perhaps indistinguishably simulated. Mm-hmm. Isn't this the lesson of things like Blade Runner and different sorts of movies where, to the horror of the audience, the person's face is peeled back and it's all machine sorts of things?
No, that's not the point of Blade Runner. The point of Blade Runner is that they really are people.
Okay, so then other sorts of.
Well, can I mention something here?
Yeah.
Back in the 1940s, and 50s, there was a guy by the name of Alan Turing.
Yeah, sure.
Who wrote a paper called The Imitation Game. Yeah. And in that, the whole point of that paper was whether computers could be have the properties you're saying they have. Yeah. And the conclusion that he came to was, if you can design a computer so that it is indistinguishable from a person. In other words, you have a person in one room and a computer in the other, and there's a wall between, so you can't tell which is which, and you ask each of them questions. And if at the end, no one can tell one of them's a computer and the other one's a human, then you can't but admit that the computer is a human or acting like a human. And you may say, well, it's all algorithms and they're just doing this and they're doing that. But then you can say the same thing about a human. I could look at you guys and say, well, you're answering like a human, but there's no proof that you're really a human in there because you answer the same way this computer does. So really, it's a deep question that I don't know if we're going to be able to answer right away.
Yeah, but here's a question to that Turing criterion. Because what the Turing criterion says is, epistemological indistinguishability entails metaphysical sameness. Mm-hmm. Right? Why should we believe that? Given the distinction that we've already established between process and
I'm going to need ChatGPT for that phrase
that
you just said.
No. Okay. Let me break it down. Like the fact that you can't tell, that's epistemological indistinguishability. That people can't tell means that the guts of the thing and the being of the thing must be just the same. I mean,
it's not really saying that they must be. It's just saying that you can't decide one way or the other. There's no way to decide if they act exactly the same. You can't say they aren't. That's all it's saying. You can't say they aren't. You can't say they are either, but you can't say they aren't.
It might be. Yeah. So that might be true. So it might be that. But then it ends up being a less interesting sort of thesis. It's like, if on the basis of a thing's behavior, a person and a simulation of a person can't be told apart, then on the basis of behavior, we can't tell them apart.
This may go over Terry's head, but there are deep anxieties here in the philosophy of language, but the very meaningfulness of our language, right? It's not just like a kind of, how would you know?
You want to spell that out a little bit?
Not right now.
Okay.
Well, can I mention one thing that I came across as I was experimenting for weeks with this thing? It doesn't know how to derive answers. It knows answers. And in fact, even the people that program it don't know how it gets the answers that it gets. There's no detailed understanding of how it gets the answers it gets, but it gets the right answers most of the time. So I can ask it a question about science, which is what I'm interested in, and it'll give me the right answer. And in the future, it might become good enough that it'll give me the right answer to questions that we don't know the answer to. And in fact, it already is starting to be able to do that. So I can ask ChatGPT what the answer to a scientific question that everybody's interested in, and it'll say 42 or something like that. And yes, that will be the right answer.
Yeah.
But that's not what we want.
Yeah.
There's a difference between and you guys, all of you brought it up, exactly what I'm trying to say is that we as people or as scientists, we're not interested in the right answer, although most freshmen that come into our science and mathematics classes think that all we care about is the answer at the end. It's not. What we care about is how you got the answer, because that's where the understanding is. You understand nature if you know how the answer arrived. The laws of the universe gave us this answer. So ChatGPT in the future is going to be useful for everyone in order to check what we're doing or to give us answers to questions we don't know. But it's not going to replace us, because right now it doesn't know why it got the answer or how it got the answer. It just spits out the answer. And then we have to go back and find out why the universe is organized in such a way that that is the answer. In other words, to understand the science behind it. And ChatGPT can't do that right now and probably never can.
Good. And this connects very, very nicely with the thing that I started off with wonder, because the terminus of wonder, what heals wonder or solves wonder, something like that, is understanding. When that's when you no longer wonder, but now you can maybe you marvel at the thing, but now it's something that you actually grasp. And so wonder and understanding form a kind of pair, and that seems to be distinctive of our way of encountering it.
Let me give one quick example. I asked ChatGPT, I said, write a program in a computer programming language called Form, but don't worry about the language. Any programming language, it can write computer programs and they work. Okay, so I said, write a computer program in Form to take the derivative of x squared. And if you're a mathematician, you'll all know what the derivative of x squared is. The answer is 2x. Okay, and ChatGPT said, the answer is 2x. And I said, no, I don't want the answer. I want you to write a computer program that will solve that derivative for me and get the answer 2x. Here's the computer program it wrote, because it doesn't know Form. That's why I chose that. It's very good at some languages like Python that everybody in the world uses. And why is it good at it? Everyone in the world uses it, and it was trained on everybody in the world's stuff. Hardly anybody uses Form, so that's why I used that as an example, and it doesn't know Form. Here's the program it wrote. Define derivative equals 2x, and then print derivative.
So good.
Are you serious?
It's so clever. Yeah. It's good.
No understanding there, but it was a program that worked.
Yeah.
I have to object to this whole thrust. I know we're running out of time, and we want to have some Q&A. First of all, I think it'd be pretty trivial to build a machine with second-order desires, right? That's not hard, or third order, or fourth order, whatever. You just,
Well, what would that look like?
I mean, do whatever you did to give it first-order desires, but do it at the second order, right?
I don't know.
So just instead of telling it, like respond as best you can, I take it the first order desire of ChatGPT is something like I desire to respond as best I can to the prompts that I get. So a second order desire would be something like reorder your first order desires, such as to minimize electricity usage or something, right?
Can we ask it?
Yeah.
Go
for
ahead.
it. Yeah.
But I also want to say, I think we need to distinguish two things. It may be the case that a neural network structured broadly like ChatGPT could never really be a person in the relevant sense, right? But it seems to me that if you structured it differently, right? If you trained it on train the network not just on the data of the internet, but also on the data of its own synaptic connections evolving over time, then it could evolve gradually something like an understanding of the facts that it knows, right? I mean, look, this much is true. I want to say this as carefully as I can. The aspect of you that is physical is a neural network. Make sense of that connection to your mind however you like,
Sure.
right? But surely there's some way to build a neural network such that it would be a person, because you are one.
That's a good question. Are we just a neural network?
This is why I tried to phrase it carefully. There's some sense in which you are just a neural network. I'm eager to say, no, you're more than that. But given that let's put it this way, if we could run on NVIDIA chips precisely the same neural network that's running in your skull right now, it strikes me as foolish to deny that it would be having thoughts.
Go for it.
Yeah. Well, maybe I can jump in here a little bit. So, in my reflections preparing for this, I thought some more about maybe the ethical questions, but specifically the ethical question of what is the sorts of duties that we have towards other people, and how does that fit into a discussion like this? And I think that, I mean, it seems to me, right, that in principle, I don't see why some kind of artificial construction couldn't be a person in the meaningful sense. I mean, even if you have sort of Aristotelian worries about ensoulment here or something like that, well, couldn't God give a soul to some piece of matter that we've formed in a certain way? Okay. So just like in principle, is this something that's impossible? I don't see the argument that would say it's in principle impossible for there to be something that we have sort of created and given the material structure, and then from that arises something like consciousness or desires or maybe even wonder. Now, nothing about ChatGPT has made me think that that's what we have here, but that at least seems to me theoretically possible. And if that's the case, then I would think that we would have obligations towards it as a person. And that's for the same reason that we have obligations towards other people. And that's because we recognize in them something like we experience in ourselves, or maybe in young babies, like the potential for that experience. We recognize consciousness and ability to respond to reasons. I think we haven't talked about this, but as I was reflecting on this, I think the ability to respond to moral kinds of reasons is really important here. And part of what it means to be a person is to be able to respond to moral reasons, moral kinds of considerations, practical reasons, not just theoretical reasons and working out a problem, but practical reasons about how to act. And if we can recognize that in another thing, which we recognize that in other people, as far as we can tell, you have the same kind of conscious experience that I do. So I have an obligation to you because I can see that. And because naturally we recognize a kind of, horror and revulsion at harming something that has this kind of consciousness and experience that we do.
Though it becomes, I don't really know how to answer this, but it becomes an urgent question. What in the world would harm or benefit mean in this context?
Right.
It is not even clear to me that like shutting it off is harming it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's why I think the standard for something like this to be a person might actually have to be quite high, because we would have to recognize in it something similar enough to our own way of life where we could meaningfully recognize a kind of moral obligation there. And what that would look like would have to be something very human.
I would not doubt that already with ChatGPT at the level it's at right now, I bet already there are people that are in love with it. Romantically.
Yeah.
There are people out there chatting with it, and it's chatting back, and it's saying all the right things, and they're falling in love with it intellectually.
I've got this thought about morals. Could you ask it to make a promise?
Sure.
Yeah.
You've heard of Replica, right? So there's an app that is built in AI instantiation that's supposed to be a romantic
It's
companion.
supposed to be your companion.
And for a while, the server went down, and there were people who were suicidal, apparently.
What would you like me to ask it?
Just ask it to promise us something.
Okay.
We should do Q&A soon because we only
Yeah, let's
have
do that.
5 minutes left.
Promise me
Yeah.
never
I think I've said enough.
over the
Why don't we start calling on students? Is
Yeah.
that okay?
Go for it.
Go ahead.
So there's this idea that we keep on coming back to of the idea of like it either becoming human-like or replacing us in some manner. If I understand it correctly, kind of that idea that like, can we create an artificial intelligence that has the same capacity as humans? I think to some degree, I understand that argument, but I think a more direct danger or more recent danger that we might look at is whether we will end up needing a codependency on AI. And the idea of like right now, the AI is dependent on our existence for it to exist. Is there going to become a point where it will get to the point where we need it to surpass information that we currently have? So we depend on its existence so that it can depend on our existence. And that idea that it might not necessarily be human, but as humans, we need it to exist in some capacity.
But that's already true of all of our technology.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's going to be true.
I mean, we're going to struggle without glasses. We're going to struggle without shoes. We're going to struggle without heating. We're going to struggle without cars. America can't live without cars, the way the suburbs are spread out and things like that.
And
So-
soon we'll have self-driving cars that are driven by AIs, and no
Yeah.
one will learn how to drive anymore.
and think about
then we'll need AIs to drive us.
think about your phone. I asked AI to help me with my Easter menu, and now I feel a kind of temptation in my mind, any sort of brainstorming task, to go to it rather than to do it myself. So I feel that dependence.
You have a question?
So how much access does ChatGPT to have like scientific papers and all of that? Because I noticed that how much access does ChatGPT have to scientific papers and all of that? Because I noticed it suffers a lot of the same problems with answering scientific questions as just the general internet does.
Yeah. Well, it's doing predictions. So for example, if you have references, if you're asking it for references, it's just predicting what a reference looks like. So it's not going to give you the actual reference because it's not actually giving you the number that it read off of an internet site. It's not parroting things it's read off the internet. It's creating new things based on patterns. So if you say, give me the citation list for the essay you just wrote for me, the citation list is going to be a bunch of nonsense, but it will look like a valid citation list.
No, more to the point, like
Okay.
if you ask it to answer a specific scientific question.
Yeah.
Like I asked it, how high can birds fly, specifically eagles, and it gave me a 10,000 to 20,000 feet.
Okay.
I asked it what the 10 highest flying birds are. Eagles didn't clock above 10,000 feet.
Yeah. It's because it
So-
doesn't know the answers to any questions.
I'm just wondering, did it have access to scientific papers when it was doing its training?
Yeah, but it only trains itself on the patterns, exactly like these guys were saying, is that it sort of has a probability of what the next word is going to be. And it does that. And it's based on all this data, what the highest probability next word is going to be. And so if you think about it, if you're answering your questions by just going, what's the highest probability next word based on frequency that it's the next word in everything, you're not going to get answers to questions like that are consistent. However, you should still be amazed by how the answers do come out. Isn't it amazing that the answers are logical and correct, and it's just doing that?
So, Dr. Gomez had said that we have like obligations towards the AI as if it's like becoming as a person, just like we have obligations towards other human beings. And I guess my question is, I read an article about how in Saudi Arabia they gave this AI civil rights, which was more rights than women in Saudi Arabia were having. And I guess my question is, if AIs are becoming more like humans, then are we supposed to be giving them rights equal to humans?
Can I say, I think we should give women civil rights.
Well, I guess this question was sort of directed at me. So, well, I think, I mean, same rights as humans is interesting because I think some of the rights that we have as human beings are tied to the sort of human way of life that we live. And so we need certain things for our flourishing, like an ability to, believe according to our own understanding and of freedom of speech and other things like that. And so what that necessarily looks like in the case of some kind of artificial intelligence, it's unclear. And that's partly why I think for us to recognize an AI as a person, they're probably going to have to share something of the human way of life for us to be able to recognize in the AI something like our own experience. But yeah, it's a complicated question because it's going to have to some way be tied to what does it mean to live as this new type of being, an artificial intelligence, and what are the sorts of things that it needs to live out its life of consciousness or whatever. So I think it probably will look different.
I want to mention something too. One thing that, I want to make sure this gets in. I signed a petition that we should have legal entities inspecting ChatGPT and other AIs that come along. And the reason I did it is this. You probably have noticed horror stories about bad things that it's said to people, on accident or whatever. They'd say something and it would start saying bad things, maybe things that are against certain groups of people or whatever. Point of the matter is then there's a big uproar. The company panics. Oh no, my AI is saying things that aren't politically correct or are racist or whatever. Then what happens to respond to that is the programmers change the code so it won't do that anymore. This is dangerous because we're relying on the programmers in there to define the morality of the answers that the ChatGPT are giving. We can't let an arbitrary unknown person behind the scenes in some corporate business define that morality when 300 million people are using it and asking its questions every day, and its answers are going to be swayed towards one sort of standpoint or another, and that's coming from the programmers. I would rather have society as a whole defining what modifications need to be made to the answers than just some guy we don't even know, especially when all of our kids and all of our colleagues are using it to answer questions and maybe having their own opinions formed by its answers.
Well, that's a great point. I mean, because persons have their morality through conscience, right? They don't have their morality programmed, which is just it's an important thing to keep in mind. Are we at our time? Okay.
So y'all were talking earlier about how ChatGPT doesn't actually understand anything he's doing.
Yeah.
One experience I've had is when I ask him how code works, he can typically explain what each function is doing. In other words, he can kind of explain how he built it. So how would you say that's different from him understanding what's happening?
Are you talking to me? Okay, so my example is if you asked it for a question where you don't understand how it works. And if you don't understand how it works, it's very likely that all the scientific papers out there don't either, right? Because if you know what I mean? So, and it'll answer a question, it'll give the right answer, presumably, somehow, because it correlates things that a human being can't possibly have that much stuff input to correlate. And it figures out the answer, and it doesn't know how. And if you explain it how it got the answer, it'll give you a nonsense thing like define 2x, you know what I mean? So from my point of view, I want to use it in the classroom as much as I can for exactly the reasons you're saying, where it can explain things to some extent. It can tell you what the right answer is, but my quizzes and questions and things of the students are going to be, why is this the way it is? Why does this work? In other words, use your ability as a human that it doesn't have. I'm not sure if that quite answered the question.
Right, thank you.